I was trying to think about where to go with this video, but I think the way to go with this video is just explain it from my perspective and then the way I see it. And hopefully within the context of that, this makes a pretty decent video. 3,100 people died today from COVID. 3,100 people. And that goes from the 2,500 or the 3,000 that died the day before. Then you were getting into 2,500s, etc. That's not even a peak. That number is going through the stratosphere because it's not just the number. It's also the acceleration, right? Like gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. You're moving this fast, but you're moving this fast or faster every second. It's kind of like that. The number of people who are dying, the number of people who are filling the ICUs, the number of people who are being affected, that number is going through the roof. Now, the person who's supposed to be paying attention to that, who was supposed to be paying attention to it prior, who was supposed to be putting their finger on the pulse to keep that stuff in check, that had the responsibility of the social safety net to ensure that people were made whole and to ensure the government was propped up. That guy focused so much on the economy and focused so much on cash, believing that that would be the thing that would save him in this election, that he basically said masks were unmanly, the thing that he would have needed to get him from point A to point B, didn't invest in the public, meaning took forever to come around to using the Defense Production Act to ensure that people had the ventilators and the mask and the equipment, make sure we had the nursing staff and the doctors. He didn't do those things. You had scenes where the governor was trying to defend property because the federal government was on the prowl to steal it. Like, these are the chaotic scenes that we had in this country in regards to COVID. The person who the president was choosing to give that advice, be it Birx or be it Atlas. One, Atlas was not even an epidemiologist. He is some guy that the president just decided, this guy's telling me what I want to hear. What he wanted to hear was basically do nothing. And that you doing nothing was somehow doing something. Even Sweden changed this model, realizing failure. I guess I'm making the point that at the time where the numbers are spiking, the person who's supposed to be on the job at the moment, the president, still currently lamed up, yes, is not on the job. Instead, he is trying to foment a coup. So not only is he not doing the job that he's supposed to be doing right now at this very moment, he is taking this extra constitutional approach to staying in office. For what reason? To continue to not do the job that you weren't doing in the first place, even before the election, with 200,000 people dead. At this point, it's nearly 300,000. What justification do you have for staying in that office when the number is at 3,100 and that U.S. is the epicenter? You can call it the China virus all you want. China was able to deal with the virus. What's your excuse? You had 3 months in advance. You knew how bad it was going to be. And then you turn around and basically lie to the American public and fail miserably. I don't have to see the sliding door to realize that a ham sandwich would have done a better job with COVID than Trump. Donald Trump right now is trying to get a bunch of other Republicans together to basically steal the election. And yes, on the day that 3,100 people died because he hasn't been doing his job. And that's not even the number of people talking about infections and the increase in those numbers, which means that more people are going to die later on and more people are going to get infected as it exponentially goes forward. They could vaccinate starting today. Wouldn't matter one hill of beans. That number is going to proliferate, and that number is going to go with a certain degree of momentum because just how many people have been infected. So that's one side of it. Trump was offering $1.8 trillion. Super genius Nancy Pelosi said that wasn't enough. Trump had to give her 2.8 or 2.2 trillion or some whatever that number was, 2.2 or 2.4 trillion. But that the 1.8 wasn't enough. 1.8 wasn't enough. Biden gets elected and 1.8 is not just enough. We're willing to accept half of that. Part of me feels like the Republicans are trying to make a point and showing how ridiculous the Democratic Party is. Nancy Pelosi grandstands. 1.8 million is not enough. 1.8 trillion is not enough. Biden wins. Super genius. Nancy Pelosi is willing to accept half. Listen to super genius Nancy Pelosi try to explain why half is somehow better.
Oh, okay, but what shifted, in your opinion, when the Problem Solvers Caucus had a much larger bill a few months ago? You did not like that piece of legislation. What has shifted now when they're on board with this piece that's come out of the Senate?
Perhaps you missed what I said earlier. Joe Biden committed to ending and crushing the virus and having a Build a Better America initiative, Build Back Better, a vaccine, answer to our prayers of 95% effectiveness in terms of Pfizer and Moderna, and there may be others coming forward. That is a total game changer, a new president and a vaccine. So there's.
Here's the thing, super genius Nancy Pelosi. You're telling a little bit too much on yourself. Why are you willing to accept less now, but you were not willing to accept more before the election? And would more have been beneficial to the constituency that you claim to be here representing? And her answer is, Joe Biden won the election. We got a new president. So you, Nancy Pelosi, are making a connection between policy and not appropriating or not taking the 1.8 trillion that Donald Trump was offering, and is making that connection to the outcome of the election. It seems like she's implicitly saying that, look, now that Biden is in, we can accept it. Biden is a new president. At the end of the day, Biden won. And my tactic of not accepting the money that they were offering, because I didn't want basically Trump to get a win. I mean, I didn't want Trump to get credit for this particular bill. So I figured freezing this was better. I wanted to ensure that the president didn't get a win because I didn't want that win to potentially look good just before the election. She was basically playing politics. Now, the reality of this is that super genius Nancy Pelosi doesn't know if her withholding the stimulus money had any effect on the election. And super genius Nancy Pelosi also has to realize that the vaccine was going to be created regardless. Donald Trump apparently didn't put any money, despite calling this stuff Operation Warp Speed, but they still got the vaccine done in record time. Meaning that what you've done by accepting less potentially had no effect on the outcome of any of this stuff. The effect that it will have is that people will get less. That is definitely a definitive outcome for that. And why is that a big deal? Some of the people now, Democrats and the media, has gotten on this mantra now that Joe Biden is in office, that, all right, we got to turn it around. You can't be overly angry about the stimulus. Now you have to talk about this from the standpoint of less than $1 trillion is enough. And maybe the economy isn't hurting that bad. Maybe people aren't hurting that bad at all. And maybe if you gave them 1.8 trillion, they would have just put it in the bank. So maybe the pain of America is not as bad as we were saying it was prior. You don't believe me? Listen to this guy. Listen to what this guy says. He says amazing things.
Protection, a huge priority for McConnell. I want to ask you about Bernie Sanders and other progressives that are not happy with this stimulus package because it does not include stimulus checks. The same actually goes for Republican Josh Hawley of Missouri. But would that idea have enough impact on the economy that it would lead to ultimately spiking this bill altogether, do you think?
Well, I think the criticism is right in the sense that this $908 billion package is not enough to get the economy through the whole pandemic. And what's interesting is, as you mentioned, it's not just from the left. We heard Senator Josh Hawley say that he told President Trump that he thinks Trump should veto the whole thing if stimulus checks are not included. But, the economists that I'm talking to, they say, listen, we don't know that stimulus checks are really needed right now. A lot of Americans would probably just save that money rather than spend it.
Truth of the matter is, you have two segments, a bifurcation of your society. You have the rich that did phenomenally well. You you have people with incomes over a certain amount, let's say incomes over 100,000, that for the most part are whole. For the most part, not entirely, but the higher up you were on the income scale, the better you were able to withstand this particular shock. Many of these jobs were able to work from home. Many of the people, for the most part, were able to basically cobble together their ends after the fact. They were able to weather the storm pretty well. And to give specific numbers on this, unless I kill the paper, damn it, I must have ended the thing. Look, I guess my point is, the higher up on the income scale you were, the better off you fared. The lower down on the income scale you were, the worse off you fared. And this goes to small businesses also. People of color, for example, and small businesses fared worse. The majority of the money from those loans went to big business, despite the fact that those loans were supposed to go to small business or struggling businesses. Donald Trump and his family also was able to get money from those loans, despite being president and despite these guys being part of the package itself. It was appalling when we got to see who was getting the money, how much of that money was going to big business as opposed to the other small businesses. You're talking about something like 40% of the businesses are not coming back, up in smoke, gone. And the people who are working at those businesses also no longer have a job. They're no longer getting revenue. They're out of work. This doesn't even deal with the evictions. This doesn't deal with the people who are in these food lines. I mean, you're talking about food lines that go on for miles, that take hours for these people just to try to get any meat, sustenance, because they don't have it. I guess I'm making the point that to make this argument entirely misses the number of people that are struggling and entirely misses the bifurcation in the society where, yeah, an aspect of the society, let's say those making over 100,000 will probably put it in the bank. The people who are struggling, the 25% that have taken a pay hit, the 1/3 that couldn't figure out whether or not they were going to pay their rent for next month. And I'm talking about of Americans as a whole. This is phenomenally bad. And so it's amazing that somebody would come on television yesterday and say something like that, or yesterday or day before yesterday, and say something like that, make a statement like that, basically saying, hey, people will probably put it in the bank, when it is very clear that there's a bifurcation within the context of this society. No, the new script has flipped. Joe Biden is in, Nancy Pelosi is out there saying, hey, this money, less, is perfectly okay and better. And now you have media basically beginning to parrot that very specific narrative. The reality of it is this. These are the job numbers. This is what came out today. Weekly initial jobless claims surged to 853,000 versus the expected 730,000. We're talking about like 20 million people are currently now out of a job, just kind of floating. And some of those people don't believe they're ever going to be able to make ends meet ever again. That's how bad it is. And you have other cases where the people are just in dire straits. Think of the evictions for the moment. Yes, there was a moratorium, but the moratorium didn't stop people from being evicted. Not everybody understood how to use the mechanisms of state to prevent themselves from being evicted, and those people were being evicted. The amount of money that's been accumulated, meaning the rent is still stacking up. At the moment that all of it ends and those people are going to be given the go-kart, they're going to be off to the races. And sheriffs are going to be out kicking people out of their homes in the middle of a pandemic. All of the money, all of the energy that we put into the social safety net, and the moment when it is needed, look what happens. They fuck you over royally. This is the weekly job claims. 853,000. Initial jobless claims soared to 853,000 last week as a surge in coronavirus cases pushed more businesses to implement stricter measures and social distancing, forcing more people out of their jobs. By the way, it's not just what the businesses do. When people see 3,100 people die, what do? Do you think they get more active at their gym? Do you think they're more likely to go to restaurants? Do you think they're more likely to be out in public for various things that aren't necessarily emergencies? Or do you think they will be less? I guarantee you it's less. Even in places where they open up the businesses, those businesses still see a drought because the majority of the people still believe that this is an issue. And because they believe it's an issue, those businesses take the hit, even in Republican territories where they try to keep them open. It's not enough to say, okay, yeah, we're going to keep the businesses open because those people are taking a hit. Even if the business is open, it is still taking a hit. That's the point that I'm making here. Government, social safety net, that is what this is here for. And the fact that those loans and everything else was allowed to expire, the fact that Pelosi and the Democrats decided they didn't want to do stimulus, here's the consequence. Here's the context. Super genius Nancy Pelosi decides she doesn't want to do the deal because she believes that Joe Biden will be hurt by Donald Trump getting a win. Trump loses. Nancy Pelosi looks at this and says, everything's great. I have $100 million in the bank. That's my gamble. My gamble paid off because Joe Biden won. And we may even get the Senate on top of that gamble. The catch is, what have you lost, though? The 40% of businesses that wasn't getting the cash, the people that are being evicted, the people that are in these food lines. Nancy Pelosi, while she was dancing between her $12,000 twin $12,000 ice boxes, talking about ice cream, food banks. You're talking about lines that went for miles. And these guys are basically playing politics. They're playing politics. People are suffering. This job report, if that's not an indication of people suffering, I don't know what is. And Pelosi is playing politics. Economists have predicted that the latest weekly jobless claims total would be around 730,000, higher than the prior week's revised tally of 716,000. But this number is basically 100,000 higher. And just to give you an idea of what expired, because it's one thing to say that the PPP loans expired, or that that this or that expired, meaning you're thinking of an entirety of a program. But there are various facets of the program, and each of those things are basically going for naught. I want to read you off the programs that were in place and the programs that are going to expire, because I want to give you this clear idea on what is being lost. They decided to play politics, and as they play politics, they basically allow people to go hanging, to go without. And in going without, then turning around accepting less. So those people aren't going to get relief. Those people are not going to be made whole, or their issue is not going to be ameliorated anytime soon. Those people are basically going to suffer because Nancy Pelosi wanted to play politics. And fact of the matter is, super genius Pelosi doesn't even know, as a flat fact, if her withholding that stimulus benefited Joe Biden at all. It's very possible that the public saw both at fault, not just Trump. And the overperformance of Trump seems to believe that the public actually gave Trump credit for what he did do. And in giving Trump credit for what he did do, it gets across how paltry, how small and insignificant and tiny the paucity of your ideas. The ideas are so small that when you give the public something tiny, they're appreciative. And they dump that credit on Trump. Meaning, super genius Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump still got the credit for doing what you didn't allow him to do the second time around, meaning stimulus. Right here. These are the things that are set to expire. Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation. This program extended regular unemployment insurance from 26 weeks to 39 weeks, affecting 4.6 million people. Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. Independent contractors, self-employment, and gig workers and other workers who don't qualify for unemployment benefits get up to 39 weeks of unemployment insurance under the CARES Act, affecting 7.3 million workers. Paid leave protection. Under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, certain employers are required to give time off to people who are caring for other ones who are sick or who are sick themselves. Renters eviction moratorium. A health order from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention allowed tenants nationwide who met certain conditions to give their landlords signed declarations to temporarily stop evictions and take sworn testimony in court. By the way, that's not a perfect process, and people are still being evicted. Home foreclosure and eviction moratorium. For homes with federally backed mortgages from Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, foreclosures were suspended for single-family homes and for evictions from properties that are already foreclosed but still have people living in them. Student loan deferment. Student loan deferments were set to expire December 31st, but were extended Friday by the Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to January 31st. Penalty-free retirement withdrawal. The CARES Act allowed for penalty-free withdrawals from 401 and IRA accounts, retirement accounts, up to $100,000. The normal 10% penalty was waived. There was no mandatory withholding requirements. All of that, up in smoke, torched, gone. These guys just wanted to play politics. They held up that money with the notion that it was going to somehow hurt Trump. And the trick, the scary, the sad part is that the public is so deadened in their expectations of what they're going to get, the fact that they got anything at all, they bestowed that thank you upon Trump. So whether he got the stimulus or not was almost, I would argue, irrelevant. It was irrelevant. Meaning you basically got less for nothing. You got less for nothing. Or, I'm sorry, the public got less for nothing. You have $100 million in the bank. And last but not least, with 3,100 people dead today, what do you think the public is thinking? What do you think the public is thinking? There's a new president that's coming in. That president is talking about mask mandates. On top of the mask mandates, you're seeing 3,100 people die. You're seeing the number of people that are being affected. You're seeing ICUs overcrowded. You're seeing many of these places talking about triage and rationing care because so many people are ill that they have to make those paper choices. You're seeing this all throughout the Midwest, and it could be in your area or it could be in an area near you, wherever it is. If you're watching TV, if you're watching the internet, you're seeing those numbers, and it has to, at the very least, if you're a rational human being, give you pause. What's going to happen? Right? If you're in a job that could be potentially shut down, if you were in a job that got shut down at one point, reopened, you may be concerned about whether or not you're going to get income. It doesn't seem like Congress can get anything accomplished, so you are basically left to your own devices. In the same way the government shut down the first time around, it's possible you would have to imagine they could do it again. Meaning, if you're a rational, sane human being, American, that is trying to make your way from point A to point B, you have no idea of what is coming up and what is going to take place. And I would imagine that has to create a certain degree of anxiety. The higher you are in the income bracket, the less anxiety you may have about that situation. But again, this is a bifurcation of the society. Understand, 42% of the people in this society was making less or $18,000 a year. That is a monstrously poverty wage. That's below the poverty wage in real terms. But we keep that number that low because we don't want people to realize how many people are actually in poverty, struggling to make ends meet. So then you have something like COVID, where all these jobs go up in smoke, and the majority of those jobs are basically from people who are already struggling, people who are already at the low end of the economic scale. And those were the people that basically took the biggest hit. Obamacare, when it was signed, day after it was signed, there were still 26 million people without health care. With so many people losing their jobs, you also have a flood of people who've lost access to health care in the midst of a pandemic. So you have like 30 million, 40 million people without health care as a result of basically policies that we've taken. I'm making a point that the public is probably freaked out. And with an incoming administration, you would think that you would try to soothe the public's concerns, that you would try to deal with the public concerns. But instead, Joe Biden is deadening expectations. Joe Biden is basically telling people, hey, I don't think we can do what those people say we could do with the executive order. So don't expect too much on the executive order front. This is a leaked audio that just came out today, apparently, where he was talking to the civil rights groups telling him, don't expect too much out of me on executive orders. But I do believe in this topic, but don't expect anything from me on executive orders. He is basically deadening expectations and hadn't even gotten into office yet. I'm making the point that with the public this freaked out because of what is taking place, you would think that the president, that one, would be out there, bully pulpit, screaming to high heaven about what he's going to do, and that the American public shouldn't have to worry, and that don't worry, help is coming, etc., etc., etc. But no. I won. I just wanted to win. And I have. I can go back to my basement. You have no leverage to push me anymore. You can complain, you can bitch, you can moan. You see who I'm putting in these cabinet positions, so you already know where my head is. So what is the point in even asking? You know where I am. I'm Joe Biden. I've been there for the last 47 years. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that the public is hurting. And that Nancy Pelosi, who's now trying to get the public to convince them that less is more, and the media that's trying to convince them that less is somehow more, and Joe Biden, who's not even to be found, Trump, who's out there basically not giving a shit that 3,100 people died today. No, he's more concerned about overturning the election. And for the American public, nobody speaks for it. Actually, that's not entirely true. There's one guy. There's one guy. Despite my grievances with Sanders, he is a one-note pony, but god damn, that is a good note.
Assistance that they need. So we are working on bipartisan legislation, and on Senator Hawley has done a very, very good job on this, and proud to yield the floor to him.
President.
Senator from Missouri.
I'm delighted to join with Senator Sanders.
Assistance that they need. So we are working on bipartisan legislation, and on Senator Hawley has done a very, very good job on this, and proud to yield the floor to him.
Not last, that once we take care of our other priorities.
These guys, Josh Hawley, Bernie Sanders joined forces with Josh Hawley. And basically, they want an up and down vote on stimulus checks. Sanders hasn't stopped fighting. And I think it's emblematic of this inflection point that I think we've missed. The guy who didn't win it is out here fighting tooth and nail because it digs in him and it matters. It's a principle of ideology. He cares just that much. The person who did win it is in his basement because he doesn't give a shit. Nancy Pelosi, who's basically super genius, telling people that less is more in the news media. None of these people are involved with skin in the game. Yes, they may be political actors. Yes, they may be on the TV and the radio and everything else. But these aren't people that are hurting. At the end of the day, this is, they're rich. They're part of this kind of oligarchical class. They don't have to worry about healthcare. They don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to get it, their kids can get an education or whatnot. This stuff is already set. The grievances, the complaints, the problems that we have are not exactly the same things that they have. The way that this message has just flipped on its head, that less is more, is evidence of that. Look, it's propaganda in some way, right? But I do think this kind of panorama of what the upper echelon in our politics is doing is informative. And, you know, regardless of my grievances with Sanders, he still does his thing. The problem, of course, is that this fight is much stronger before the election. After the election, it's far, far weaker because your leverage basically evaporates. Joe Biden got the tail at that point. I don't have to call you anymore. I've already tasted it. Thanks. I don't need it anymore. And at that point, he's in office. There's not really anything you can do about it. In fact of the matter is, we don't even know if Joe Biden is going to live the next 4 years. So Joe Biden can do whatever he wants in that office. He can take a dump on a White House table. You can't do anything about it. You can wag your finger. You can say that's inappropriate. You can be angry at him. But at the end of the day, you're stuck with him. Lefties, you may have buyer's remorse. You're stuck with him. You knew what Joe Biden was before Joe Biden basically ran. Ugh. I'll leave it here. I mean, it's just such a disastrous day in regards to the number of people that have died from COVID, the number of people that got infected from COVID. And then you look at the job reports and you say, oh God, the number of people who are unemployed is getting worse. Of course it is. Once all of the loans and everything else that was keeping the economy propped up went up in smoke, what did you expect was going to happen? All of this was infinitely predictable. And it's pretty appalling that Nancy Pelosi basically says it's worth it because Biden has basically gotten elected. That Biden is not doing anything to calm down the fears and the anxiety that is within the context of the public itself. That Trump doesn't seem to give a shit about the fact that 3,100 people have died. Instead, he is fighting for a job that he is not even doing. And the guy that lost and has been marginalized, Sanders, is still out there plugging away, trying to get people $1,200. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.